This program has been made possible by the generous support of these organizations at Stanford University: Office of the Provost, Institute for International Studies, School of Humanities and Sciences, and Ambassador and Mrs. L.W. Lane, Jr., Donald L. Lucas, the Russell Family Foundation, Ronald P. Spogli. International Environmental Politics was offered to students at Stanford University as part of the International Policy Studies program during Winter Quarter 2001.
Version of what you have from the article that Thomas and I wrote, on the kind of 6 elements. Again, identifying an important theoretical question, you should have, I've sort of done that for you because I'm requiring that you do something related to sort of treaties and their effects. You might get more specific about that, about whether sanctions work or rewards work, or whether you need monitoring, how important self-reporting is. Whatever components of the treaty you're looking at seem to be the important aspect of it, right? So if we see a treaty works, we want to know what part of it makes it work. It's not just its treatiness. Just like going to Stanford, it's not its Stanfordness, and we want to be more specific about what it is about going to Stanford that helped you get well educated or not, as the case may be, right? So hypotheses and identifying variables, knowing what it is, what's going to be your dependent variable, how are you going to measure the impact, and I'll talk about that in a second with some of the data that some of you have collected. Again, selecting cases such that you have variation across the cases, and oftentimes these questions will go back and forth. You'll pick a question, you'll use it to select some cases. When you look at the cases, you'll realize there's not variation in the way you expected, and so you then ask a question which your cases can answer. I might be interested in seeing, I might be interested in seeing how studying for classes helps your performance in those classes, and I might pick Sarah and Alex, for example, because I think beforehand that Sarah studies a lot harder than Alex does. Then I talk to them, I do a survey, I ask them questions, and then in that process, maybe I find out something about what I mean by studying, right? And so that Sarah is actually at the library more. And I had assumed that was my sort of correlate of studying, but it turns out that Alex studies in his room and studies just as long. And in fact, Sarah and Alex both study X hours a week, so 15 hours a week outside of class. Then I'm saying, oh, damn, I can't study what's the effect of studying. I can't analyze what's the effect of studying because there's no variation, right? If they both study 15 hours a week, can I analyze the effect of studying? Will I be able to say anything about the effect of studying? No. So what could I do? So what are my 2 options? I find out that Alex and Sarah are different. I was hoping Alex studied less. And I did some good case selection there, right? I picked 2 Americans. I'll make some assumptions. I picked 2 white middle-class Americans. I figured those are things that affect how well you do in school. I probably would have been done better to pick Sarah and Emily, right? So I could get rid of gender as a determinant of performance in class, right? But I picked Sarah and Alex. What do I do with that? It turns out what are kind of the options? They studied different amounts. So how do I now, it's now week 7 in the term and I'm screwed, right? Because this will happen to you. You will find out that the cases you picked don't work for the question you wanted to do. How do you deal with it, Sarah?
Well, like you were saying, you could ask a different question. And
Okay.
since something that does differ between us is the gender, you could just say, like, given that they studied the same amount, like, who does better or something like that.
Yeah, right. Well, you can figure out if I'm a sexist professor, right?
Yeah.
You can determine whether I'm basing my grading of your performance on your gender, right?
Yeah, or you could look at like other factors that are different.
Okay.
But I guess ask a different question is sort of what you're saying.
Right. And essentially, you're going to ask a question that's defined by the variation between the cases you chose, right? You attempt to select cases that vary based on the question you're asking, right? But you may have to do the reverse of that, okay? And there's usually enough variables that we care about, enough theories out there that that's relatively easy to do, okay? But notice that you can't, notice one, that the assumption that Sarah just made is she can't say anything about something that didn't vary between her cases, right? And yet, if you look at studies, they do it all the time. They make claims, that we have studies by Carol Gilligan about women who, about girls and how they learn without any reference to how boys learn. And so we don't know that it's their girlness that is why they learn the way they do. There may often be, sometimes in a lot of those studies, there's a general knowledge about how boys learn or an assumed knowledge, and that's okay. Then you get variation that way. That's fine. But it's better to try to make it more explicit, right, and control for it more specifically. So you can switch, get this kind of bouncing back and forth between cases and questions. So in my dissertation, I wanted to look at variation in treaties and how effective they were. So I picked three treaties to look at. I picked three treaties to look at. I spent a month on each collecting data in Europe. I came back and realized it wouldn't work for a variety of reasons. So I now have a shelf worth of whaling material, I have a shelf worth of oil pollution material, and a shelf worth of wetlands material. And I said, well, what do I do to get a good study out of this? And I realized that the variation across the cases wouldn't work well, but the variation within the oil pollution case was sufficient that I had multiple cases within that, right? And the great thing was it held a lot of things constant. That would allow comparison about a few things that were varying. So you sort of have to be self-conscious about that. Linking data to propositions, really hard to do and really important to do. That there's theoretical claims and you have to link those down to what do they mean on the ground in terms of what I should expect to see, okay? In terms of thinking about a treaty, okay, we have a general theory that says treaties, if they have sanctions, should have certain effects. So we find a treaty that has sanctions should have certain effects. When should it have the effects? How long after the sanctions kick in? Is it only for the countries that have been sanctioned? Is it only after a country, is it for all countries after one has been sanctioned? Do you have to kind of show that the sanctions are real rather than just on paper? You have to sort through all that. So, and we'll see that we'll come back in evaluating Peter Haas's paper at the end of class today. I want to ask you the question. He says the Med Plan made a difference. Med Plan went into effect in 1976. So we think the treaty made a difference. And one of his claims is that it made a difference for the establishment of environmental protection agencies. Okay, that countries establish environmental protection agencies in response to the Med Plan. Think about what's the implication. So when should we see EPAs being established? 1976? 77? 78? 79? 80? 81? When's the expected effect, right? Just like if we were going to say, well, going to Stanford increases your salary, right? Do we mean the first year out, or the 5th year out, or the 10th year out, or your lifetime earnings? We have to link data to propositions. We have to have some back and forth. This is the part that a lot of your papers are going to be based on, examining correlations and causal pathways. It's not merely two things to go together, but how they go together, why they go together. What's the process by which the treaty caused behavior to change? Okay? And then lastly, generalizing to other cases. Is what you found true for a bunch of other cases, or is it only true for the case you have? Okay, a part of that will flow, that'll be the least important. I'd rather, notice that in statistical terms you have two different things. Internal validity and external validity. What's internal validity? Anybody who's done science. What's the internal validity of study? Eli.
Oh, that it relates to the variables within your discussion.
Okay. And what do you mean relates to?
I guess saying like whaling, that if you use an example, I don't know, like that whaling treaties have an effect, then it should hold within all of like the whaling community and the treaties that they're in.
Okay, that's even starting to generalize. All internal validity means it's true for the case you studied. That you got the story right for the case you studied. The external validity or generalizability is about what is it true about any other study, or any other cases rather. So if I find that that Stanford's a sexist university, and that we have a good story that proves that it's the sexism of Stanford that led to Alex doing better in class than Sarah, despite everything else that we think determines performance in class being equal, right? They studied the same amount, they had the same IQ, all these other things that we would think would determine that, and we find Alex does better, and we trace the causal pathways and show that it's the sexism of the professors that led to this outcome. We try rival hypotheses that say, no, Alex, despite all the other things, just had better days that term. Just every time an exam happened, he was having a good mood and Sarah was having a bad mood, and it was just random, right? But we tell a story that tells us that we test that and we find that lacking, and we end up saying, no, it's sexism, okay? And Alex is, so we now know that Alex did better in class than Sarah because of sexism at Stanford, right? Then the question is, but would it be true for other students, right? In a comparison of Sarah to Eli, or Eli to Henke, right? Or whatever. So we want to know, is it true for other cases? So one of the claims, let's say in my oil pollution case, I don't think many people would critique my oil pollution case as wrong in internal validity terms. Most people say, I got the story right. I tell the story of oil pollution really well. Where people critique it is say, yeah, but is it true about any other treaty in the world? Is that story you're telling true anywhere else? And the people want to discount it, say, no. Yeah, a nice story, but it's one case. Doesn't a theory make, sort of. So that's the last part here. I think just going back here to examining correlations and causal pathways, the value of rival hypotheses, of looking at what somebody else might use to explain it and saying, no, that can't hold up because I find that it's not true, it's true in the wrong direction. The variety of ways you can examine rival hypotheses. So, questions on this? This should be pretty straightforward. I mean, this is just making explicit what you should already kind of have in your heads as a model. Let me show you sort of, for some of the data stuff, just a reminder that there's a ton of stuff on the web. I mean, if you guys and elsewhere, I mean, all of you who didn't go to Tony Angeletti's thing last week should go see him anyway. But things like, I mean, this is just an example of the FAO stat page, that has a lot of data on statistics on everything from, primary crop production, land use, fertilizers, pesticide trade, forestry data, etc. So you've got a lot of, and there's lots of others, beyond just the FAO page. So you have all the other links on the web page. I should have posted another thing that tries to, I think this makes sense. I now have a list from last year and the year before from people who took this class and put together their own data sets. And I think that might be valuable. It raises the bar a little for you, but to make that, to sort of say, here's data sets other people have found. You can try to see if you can find them again, refine them, and make use of those. If if you're doing the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, there's several people who did that. They found data available, etc. So the other thing you may need are when you're thinking about rival hypotheses. So, for example, in the acid rain case in Europe, what we see is the Soviet Union and a bunch of other countries complied with the 30% reduction in sulfur emissions rule, okay? There was a protocol that said we'll reduce sulfur emissions by 30% from 1985 levels by the year 1993, and the Soviet Union and a bunch of other countries complied. What's the simple rival hypothesis here? Alex?
Well, their economies collapsed.
Their economy collapsed. Production went down by 50%, sulfur emissions went down by 30%. So not likely that the treaty caused it. Rival hypothesis, how do you get that stuff? Well, there's lots of other data sets. Again, I'm just trying to give you some ideas, so you can get the social indicators of development, which can give you, here are some social indicators, but you can get GMP, all that other stuff that would be an indicator of what the economy was doing overall, okay? So let's look at something like Great Lakes water quality, for starters. So here's something from last year. This is the stuff you're going to be doing. This is what the graph you're going to be doing on the page. So I don't require you all to learn how to do Excel. I wrote a little program that you can use on the web to kind of get a basic graph, also because it structures your idea. Here's some stuff that somebody from last year did, a student named Lindsay Schatzberg. Some of you may know her. But essentially, she put in the discharge of biological oxygen demand, okay, she did from 68 to 96, almost 30 years, 28 years, okay? So I say 5 years before and 5 years after. Obviously, if you have more data, use it, right? More data points to check. And she put in actually 2 policy changes, when the treaty was signed and when the treaty was revised, thinking that, so she's got, in essence, she's got 28 observations, right, of where the independent variable that she's most interested in changes twice. There's 3 observations of it. No treaty, weak treaty, strong treaty. Assuming the treaty revision was stronger, right? And she can now say, look at what happened, okay? And this is just to give you kind of conceptually the question I want you to be asking. Did it work? And so in the thing on the web, did the ratification of the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement cause a decrease in biological oxygen demand? Okay? Basically a metric of how good the water quality is, okay? So, did it work? Okay, so you have both the data and the graph. And again, this is the simplest form of analysis you can do. I can't, 10 years from now, you plug in this stuff, it'll write your paper for you and print it out in a nice font, right? But this is just to get your analysis off in the right direction for starters. So did it work? How do we make sense of this? What kind of data would we use to suggest it was working or wasn't working? Should we imitate this treaty? Right? That's the generalizability question. That's why we care. It looks like we kind of solved this problem here, right? It's down at 0. Biological oxygen demand is down at 0 or close to it. Looks like we solved this problem. Forget this Montreal Protocol stuff. Let's imitate this one. This one looks better, right? Yes? No? What's the important question here? Let's trust the data.
Going down.
What?
It looks like it was already going down.
Looks like it was already going down?
Didn't do anything at all.
Okay. Kim?
I was saying the counterfactual.
Okay, what's the counterfactual?
That it may still happened even if the treaty had never been implemented.
Okay. So just a different version of what Emily just said, right? It was happening anyway. These guys came in and took credit for it, right, for a process. Can we be more specific?
You could look at the rate of the treaty.
Okay. Do we have that anywhere? Upper right-hand corner, right? So what does that suggest? And then how do you critique that? Is that right? What is it? Can people read it from back there? Okay. What does it suggest? Miranda. Is Emily right that or Emily and Kim right that it was already going down and it just kept going down at the same rate?
No, it looks like the treaty started to actually slow it down.
Okay, the treaty made things worse, right? If you'd stayed out of the way, things would have gone along at decreasing at 4.5 kilograms per ton per year or whatever. I don't know the units here, but right? And if you'd left well enough alone, it would have been going down at a 4.5 rate. And luckily, we had the treaty, so it slowed it down to a 2.2 rate and then a 3 rate after it got, when it really got really good, it slowed it down all the way, to a 3, right? So actually what it suggests is this weak treaty made it worse, then it got it a little bit more right? That's the short interpretation. Sarah?
But it seems like, we don't know what else was going on, and it could have been like, you know, in the years before the treaty, there wasn't much development, and then all of a sudden there are all these companies, and it's amazing that, you know, it only slowed this far. Like, it seems like we have to look at a lot of other things.
In order to get at what Kim just mentioned, right? That
to-
counterfactual, we don't know what that other line looks like. So how do you do that? Well, it's not good enough to do what Sarah just did. That's the right thing, but you have to follow up on what Sarah just did, right? Which is go and look at level of development, number of people, number of population around the Great Lakes or on the watershed for the Great Lakes. What were the things they were doing that decrease or increase biological oxygen demand? Maybe biological oxygen demand is determined by, maybe it's not even a good metric of pollution, right? You know, maybe somehow new fertilizers actually, you know, counteract this and work in the opposite direction, right? I mean, there's lots of things that could go on. That's where you have to do the analysis. But this says, the bottom line is, this is the line you have to explain, though, right? That's why I have you do this. Because absent this, we don't even have what really happened, let alone the counterfactual. This is what happened. Explain it. I don't care whether you explain it by reference to the treaty or something else. I'm not committed to the notion that all treaties work. I'm probably pretty committed to the notion that some do, but anybody can write me one, you know, all of you can come back with, I have the one that works, it's the one I study my PhD on, so I don't need any other evidence that treaties work sometimes, and I'm happy to have you come in and say, most of them don't though, right? And if all of you come in and say, most treaties don't work most of the time, that's fine with me. Because that means I can sell my notion that we should start imitating the oil pollution treaty, and I'll make a big name for myself because it's the only one that worked, and you guys should listen to me because I know what I'm talking about. But you got to start from the proposition of explaining what happened. And you explain what happened by reference to what would have happened otherwise. But you can't do it unless you have this data. You can't just say kind of airy-fairy theory. I mean, and we'll get into this. I want to talk about this. Yeah, my feeling is that these things happened, right? This is identity politics. You know, I'm a Native American who lives in New Mexico, and I know the environment's getting worse. Is that good enough? I think that's the question we want to engage now. I really want to engage that question. A lot of reasons to believe it is good enough, right? A lot of reasons to believe it's not, okay? And that's, I think, a major conflict right now, and I think that's what Tesh and Williams get at. Is it good enough to say, nah, I think the Great Lakes water quality is good enough, or it's getting worse. I remember when I was a kid, I used to swim in the Great Lakes all the time. You know, forget my third eye and, you know, my ear falling off. I used to swim there, you know, and it was fine at the time, and now I can't swim there anymore, right? Is that good enough? So this is just to give you a sense of how to use this as just a place to start, okay? And it's really just a place to start. If you want to do more sophisticated stuff, great. I would love it. I kind of expect, certainly I expect you to do more sophisticated in the sense of not quantitative and this way, but I expect you to do more sophisticated stuff in terms of your qualitative narrative analysis of the regime. So let's leave that there. We'll turn off the overhead for a sec. So let's talk for a second about this stuff by Tesh and Williams. Identity politics versus disinterested politics. I'm even going to sit down. Which should we trust? People know what. Somebody who read the article, explain what's disinterested politics. That's the easier one, or rather, the one we have talked about already in this class. I don't know if it's easier to explain or not. What's disinterested politics? Miranda.
It should be like an objective, neutral viewpoint on any phenomenon, you know?
In what?
Like on any phenomenon, like a group of people that are objective and neutral can, you know, come together and have a consensus on what's going on, like data or analyzing the situation.
Okay, the kind of Steve Schneiders of the world, right? Yeah. Or any of the people over in the bio department or geography department or, geology department or atmospheric sciences or whatever, right? Okay? Otherwise known as Western science, right? Disinterested politics, right? Disinterested science. Anybody want to say more about that? Okay, so what's it, Alex?
Going a little farther than that, I think what Steve was talking about, it's not really disinterested because these days there's an underlying thing of scientists bring their biases into the discussion. Sometimes it's not really disinterested. It's using their opinions. So it's not really objective sometimes. So that's most of the time.
Yeah, right.
But at the same time, it has to be backed up with a certain amount of data. So if you find something
True.
that doesn't prove what you're wanting to say, you either move on and have a different theory for it. You don't go out and try to, I don't know.
But you can always change your data to make it prove your point. Because there's a lot of scientists out these days that think climate change isn't occurring based on their data.
Yeah.
So it's tough.
That's
They give an example of a physician who.
Speak up and speak to the rest of the class.
Oh, they have an example of a physician who, if his patients are getting sick, will like look for a cause and then sort of assume a cause is toxic and is toxins and not really. I mean, it might be scientific. You might see, okay, these many more people are getting sick, but and the toxins are going up, but that doesn't mean there's an actual correlation.
Okay.
But he's a scientific person with a lot of degrees, so people will listen to him, and he might not be right.
If you're from Podunk University in the middle of Iowa and you say something, what's the difference between whether people listen and whether you're Steve Schneider from Stanford? This is a no-brainer, right? It's easy. Sarah.
Oh, well, I was just going to say that that's part of why I don't see... Well, at first when I was reading the article, I was sort of didn't really agree with Tesh and Williams that saying, or sort of, I guess they're sort of saying that, well, if we admit that scientists have these biases and that everyone operates with identity politics, blah, 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 that it seemed to me that it sort of invalidates a lot of what people are trying to prove and stuff like that. But at the end, their point sort of came across more as sort of looking at it in frameworks,
In frameworks?
yeah, they said if you look at it in their social constructivist framework. So, if you have a problem and you just sort of take all this data about the problem, blah blah blah, but you don't really think about it with all of the sort of like we were talking about with the treaties, with all of this. The other stuff in that context of like the Great Lakes. You just sort of think about it as like water in general anywhere, I don't know. Then that sort of, you can see the biases or all the different kinds of opinions that revolve around that particular place. I like that that's valid too.
Okay. Why don't we get, what are identity politics? Let's get that on the table. Anybody? Sarah or someone else, what are identity politics? How do we know them if we see them?
Just using social experiences.
Using social experiences? Okay, somebody else. I'd like to get some new, especially since we haven't up to this point had a lot of discussion, I'd like to get some new voices too. Identity politics? Yeah, Megan?
Yes.
5 extra points.
I think it's generally sort of the politics that surround various statuses in society.
Can you talk up?
The idea of status in society and the idea of the politics that surround variations in status, gaps in status between different people when they're trying to work together.
Okay. So differences in status. Okay. More.
It's very subjective. It almost kind of like localizes any experience. Like they had a good example of how scientists, or how they did the zip code, zip coding to determine whether or not, all of those waste sites was a matter of like environmental justice, but it didn't really take into account the fact that, say, like in one particular community, they could be really close to a plant or very much downstream. So, like on an objective level, they could say no, there were no reasons to say that these people should be affected by the number of treatment plants that are there. But at the same time, like the people that live, a block away from it could say, no, we're very much affected, but they could be one of the only groups that are that affected. But does that make their voice less relevant.
Okay. Okay. Others? I mean, this is the issue of if you go down to the docks, down to Pier 37 for your fancy dinner out, out in San Francisco, right? And then you go out for a nice walk afterwards, you just had, a $30 a plate fish, right? Or crabs or whatever. And you go down to walk at the dock and walk it off afterwards, and there you see a bunch of, Vietnamese immigrants or whatever, right? Asian immigrants who are actually taking crabs out of the bay. And you're saying, wait a minute, that's called a naval facility across the way there? You don't even want to know what kind of stuff they're dumping in the water, right? But you realize that these people have no alternatives, right? This is survival for these people. And that, mercury in the water, I'm getting my fish out of the middle of the ocean where the mercury levels are really low. These people are getting it right here at home, right? And so the impacts, we don't care about average impacts. What's the average level of mercury in all fish consumed? Because averages don't matter, right? But okay, so that's kind of a little bit of the science part of it, but or at least part of it, where's the politics part of it? I mean, or kind of let's pull out the politics part. Because I think what I want to frame this in why I gave these two articles, the Tesh and Williams and the Haas piece, two different ways that issues get on the agenda, right? Two different ways we identify. What's the problem? Is it a problem if a bunch of Vietnamese immigrants who live in San Francisco who don't vote, they don't even have green cards as far as we're concerned, right? I mean, let's make some nice racist assumptions, right? That they don't have a right to anything in this country, right? They're coming over, taking our damn jobs, right? But more importantly, it's a politics based in some claim that they say our people are dying, right? Our people are getting sick. I mean, that's they're putting it on the agenda, right? And perhaps effectively, right? I mean, the problem is there's 10 issues, or for every 10 issues that get on the agenda, there's 1,000 that people want to get on the agenda that don't, right? Why, in particular, should we expect this particular kind of identity politics to not get on the agenda? I mean, at least the kind that Tesh and Williams are pushing.
It's hard to get background validity.
Okay, background validity.
It's hard to organize a bunch of people down on the docks to sort of create and also even when they do organize and write down, well, these have been our experiences, it's sort of like, well, where's the data for it? And it's harder. Okay. That's sort of validity, scientific.
So one is there's a tragedy of commons here, right? The standard collective action problem of how do you get people, none of whom have any time, right? Because they're all just trying to, they're spending 24/7 just trying to put food on the table. So it's hard to get these people organized. It's hard to organize anyway, right? The cost of anybody of organizing. I mean, you should see this tragedy of commons type dynamics playing out in a lot of the world, right? The cost of the Vietnamese person who organizes incurs a large cost to their family eats less well, etc., to benefit a bunch of all the other Vietnamese immigrants who aren't willing to do that, right? Well, screw them, right? I'm going to take care of putting food on my table for my family, right? Standard problem, we all do it. We don't do it that explicitly, but that's the process, right, of making the choice to help organize or not, right? So those are the kind of politics involved. There's also an issue, okay, so one issue that Kari's raised is the issue of legitimacy. What's considered a legitimate argument? So what is considered a legitimate argument in this country and in much of the Western world? Identity politics? Identity claims? My experience is this? No, Kari's saying the opposite, right? Emily, you were smiling. So what's the basis? What constitutes a legit? I mean, notice this is a rhetorical kind of claim about the world, right? That certain kinds of argument are okay, are appropriate, and others are discredited.
Right. Those that are discredited are just, personal experiences or feeling. I feel like this toxic dump is, polluting my brain or something versus. You need scientific data. And this, yeah, definitely in the society, you need scientific data to back up any claim that you're being hurt by something or something's going on.
Okay. So a classic case of this conflict, right now, and I think it's an interesting case to me, and I'm certainly, as you might imagine, someone who tends towards the disinterested politics view of the world, right? But I want to challenge myself on that, and I'd welcome you guys challenging me more on it. But it's to think about these several suits that have been brought by women who had breast implants, who are now claiming and getting delivery in court for systemic health effects. Okay? Identity politics. Hey, here's my experience. You know, I was fine. I was healthy. I was 30 years old. I had breast implants. 5 years later, I am seeing the doctor every day because I have huge systemic health problems. Okay? So and they're going into court, and juries listening to those stories are coming out and saying, okay, here's $3 million from Dow or whoever makes these silicone breast implants, right? Okay, $3 million here, $3 million there. And all the medical profession is coming out with studies saying, no, we've looked at women with breast implants and women without breast implants, and what do we observe? We observe that systemic health problems are just as common in both populations. That is, there is no different, the base rate of, the base rate of systemic health problems is the same in the population at large as among women with breast implants. A couple things that you should worry about this, right? The first is that knowing that the base rate for systemic health effects is 0.0001% or whatever it is, right? Fairly small, we would imagine, right? What should that worry you about? You should worry about that. We've got enough women getting breast implants that we can hit that base rate, right? That should be worry. Number one is the fact that why are women getting breast implants? What is our society doing to make women feel so bad about their bodies that they're having these breast implants, regardless of what the systemic health effects are, right? We know that the fact that they're having breast implants is a suggestion that there's a lot of psychological health impacts that we're not even addressing here. But setting that aside, right, we're saying, wait, we've got a large enough number of women who have breast implants, 1 million, 2 million, 5 million, whatever the number is, that we're seeing these base rate effects show up of a very low rate thing, right? That's question one. But, I mean, if you're on a jury, who should you listen to? The woman who's sitting there and telling you that she didn't used to have these problems, and she does now, right? And she's not lying. She's not BSing you here. She didn't have health problems. Now she does. She can't take care of her kids. She can't work. She's a single mom. What do you do? And the scientist that, from the American Medical Association who says, I'm sorry, that's too bad, but it ain't true. It's true for her. You ask her, it's her reality. That is her reality. She didn't have breast implants. She was healthy. She does have breast implants. She's not. How do you choose? Sarah?
Well, I think that you should put more investment into the science or whatever and really find out what's going on. Because I think that it's not fair to just base it on one study, blah, blah, blah. I think that there's a lot going on. I think that most likely, the woman deserves compensation, and it probably is because of I don't know. I work at a community breast health project, and a lot of women have a lot of difficulties with the silicone breast implants and da-da-da-da. So I think that it just seems like that's a problem, and if science isn't figuring it out, then it's not these women's fault. It's the science hasn't figured out what exactly is doing that, and so I think that more I don't know if it's credibility or more just something needs to be given to these women, more weight needs to be given to these women than the scientific claims if they're not really reflecting reality.
But it also seems like that kind of promotes this devaluation of individuals as opposed to the larger community. It's who's more important, a group of people that are dying or the fact that, on a general level, we're okay, Well, how do you make those choices?
The way I see it is that if we don't know, then people should stop using that certain kind of breast implant because the larger population may be at risk. And because we find that out from individual experiences, we can save the larger population.
It So it seems like what you're saying is like instead of spending so much money on trying to disprove that these women wrong, saying, oh well that's not why you have breast implants, or that's not why you have problems. You should spend more science saying, well, there is admitting that there is a problem. Why is it happening?
Figuring out, yeah.
I think she makes a good point in that the credibility of science is relative, because especially when you're talking about women's health issues, like 100 years ago, science said that women who had PMS problems because of hormonal changes were making data. But now there's scientific proof that actually happens.
Okay.
And so in certain areas, you're going to have to question the validity of so-called disinterested politics more so than in other cases.
Okay.
I guess
Diana, and then Eli. Diana?
I think kind of on a larger scale, we're seeing the larger society as a whole being inculcated with this feeling or knowledge that, you can't always trust the medical community. Just going to why you're saying, why are these cases, that are not really backed up by science, going through the courts and all of that. And as if we're faced with the choice of, think about how long it's been. So it used to be that the medical community and the scientific community was above reproach, and now the general public has this kind of feel of, they've put stuff on us before. This could be the same thing happening again. And listen to this poor woman, And so it tugs at your sympathy, or the American Indian who's saying, our water sources are polluted, and I just know this because of my experience with, the scientific community has come in and done this, fantastic research and prove that actually the water quality is better. And still, you're going to, hear verdicts passed in favor of the American Indian because you've got this kind of build-up of feeling or knowledge, inculcated in you that you can't always trust what these, formerly above, beyond reproach communities are telling you. So society at whole, at large is kind of dealing with this turnover of new knowledge.
I feel like being one of those moderators on TV. Eli, too much inculcating of feelings for the American Indians.
I totally agree. I think especially with the whole tobacco thing now, where for years it's been like there's no correlation between like cancer and tobacco, and finally, like the tobacco companies are starting to at least admit it, starting to pay out. And I think like that sort of change and like these sort of changes that they're talking about really is like a whole society level change. But another thing I think about the science of these like breast implant studies that I would wonder if they did or even looked at would be like sort of family genetics, and if say there's like in the normal population, the base case, like do their mothers like or their sisters show these symptoms too, and if there's a relation between that and then the breast implant case where maybe it's still a small percentage, but there's no other health issues like in their family relating to this, whereas in like maybe the other case there might be, so you might get the same percentage, but like different people are showing that percentage with implants too.
So these studies tend to look at averages, right? I mean, go back to the example they use in the article about, the fishing, right? On average, the toxin levels are fine. It's just that that average is made up of, 1,000 people who are getting a way heavy dose, and another 100,000 who aren't getting hardly any. And on average, everybody's fine. Unfortunately, those 1,000 are dying. Megan.
I think part of it, also has to do with representation, because it's very easy for lawyers and for media people to put these stories forward as human interest stories, as individual stories, the tragedy, and she can't take care of her kids, and on the other hand, it's very easy to dismiss science as exactly that, disinterested politics. They don't care, it's very cold, they're just dismissing this poor woman's problems, and I think that has a lot to do with who gets listened to, because it's very easy to say, the medical profession is just being cold and they're not taking into account these poor people and their experiences.
But that would be unusual, right? That we wouldn't take into account poor people and their experiences? Wouldn't that be unusual in this society? I mean, I'm shocked to find we're not worried about poor people in this country.
Despite the fact that, we're always like scientific data, when it comes down to, situations in which we don't want to listen to the scientific data, there's always a reason we can do it.
Hanky?
I think kind of just going along with the same thing. She said that, I guess she alluded to earlier the United Church of Christ study on
zip codes and toxic waste. And the reason why that study was so eye-opening is because they actually found data that was statistically significant. And I think that even though you can have all this, identity politics, when it comes down to it, you have to have something that's statistically significant in order to get people's attention.
Okay. So notice how there's also a connection here, right, between the identity politics. I mean, one way to think about it is identity politics are the first thing, right, that sends this up on the agenda, right? And, I mean, identity politics in this kind of, your experiential knowledge. Experiential knowledge is called homeopathic medicine, right? It's called, all the Eastern medicines are experiential knowledge. Yeah, well, for 5,000 years, the Chinese have been using this stuff, and it tends to work. Now, you can call that experiential knowledge because they didn't run the final results of that through a supercomputer. Instead, they ran it through thousands of wise medicine people's minds, which are each one of which was a hell of a lot better than any supercomputer you can ever buy, right? Who process this information, this experience, right? But perhaps not through a statistically rigorous protocol. But I think one of the things that can happen is this linkage back and forth between experiential knowledge, which is the data, which we then feed into a scientific process. But that scientific process has values embedded in it, that then can wash out some of that experiential knowledge. It has values about who we should care about. Do we care about the average person or about the poor people, right? So there's a lot of values embedded in here. I think, to go back to Sarah's very nice laying out of, hey, this woman is getting screwed, and there are a lot of women like her, right? For me, the way I separate that out is to say, yes, there's an equity issue there. And let's deal with that equity issue, and let's deal with it in a different way or let's separate that equity issue with respect to women or African Americans or poor people or Indian Americans or whatever, right? Let's separate those issues from the causal part and let's think about where the causation is. What's causing that systemic? Because I think for me, I'm pushing my own little agenda here, so I'll kind of lay my cards on the table, but for me, disinterested politics is important, and so are values, and that you have to keep the differences clear, because in the end, I'm a hell of a lot more concerned about the millions of people who are getting systemic health problems. Whether they have breast implants or not, I don't really care. Because it seems to me that if we got that many people having systemic health problems, there's probably something else going on in the environment. For example, all the foods we eat that are not organic, perhaps. Maybe that's why everybody, breast implants or no, has systemic health problems, right? I'm worried about the systemic health impacts or systemic health problems that women face. And I want to determine the source so when I solve it, so I can take that $3 million out of the factory upstream rather than out of Dow Chemical, if Dow Chemical is not the problem, right? I mean, yeah, I'd like to beat up on Dow Chemical because it's fun anyway. I mean, just on first principles, that's a good thing to do, right? But we might be more worried about Dow Chemical polluting a river and the people downstream from that dying, or having high rates of systemic health problems, right? But I think in some ways you can square the circle between identity politics is the data points that go into disinterested politics before there's enough of them to have a disinterested politics and scientific process. But there's also this issue about, I think Diana almost flipped it on its head in a sense, right? We're too worried about personal experience, right? I mean, usually a lot of people would say, in respect to Diana's thing, no, the pendulum's over here. Disinterested politics is the only thing that's credible. And it's high time it swung back a little to worrying about identity and those sorts of issues. So I think there's some way to make sense of all of this together, to say we do have emotional bonds with people who are underprivileged and getting harmed by the system, and we should take care of that, and some sense of science, etc. So I think so this is kind of, I've been trying to have more of a discussion around what it should be like, and then trying to think about how it actually works. And I think both of these, both disinterested politics and identity politics, and luckily from my personal perspective, more identity politics are raising issues onto the agenda. They're having to be addressed. And what it does is it highlights and foregrounds the values that are embedded in disinterested science. Right. disinterested science. It shows how it is interested. The fact that we are worried about climate change rather than about schistosomiasis, river blindness, and malaria, and dysentery, right? And diarrhea, and all the other things that kill people in the developing world. We're worried about climate change 200 years from now. Hey, that's a huge value thing, right? I mean, worried about all the problems that we face, and no reference to all the problems that most people in the world face, right? That's values. That's where values come in. So I think, so one of the things I want to then come back to, I mean, do any people have last points on this? Miranda, last point? It's fine.
Well, the more that I listen to everyone, the more that I want to think that there is no such thing as disinterested politics in the first place. Like, I want to say that, like, science is already, like, still such a reflection of the larger social agenda. Mm-hmm. Like, when Kim talks about, you know, scientists or doctors 100 years ago talking that PMS was like a symptom of a woman's mind. I mean, there aren't enough women scientists in the first place. I mean, is there enough representation for the problems? I mean, people are going to look for what they conceive to be problems in the first place. Sure. And then you can find answers in science for every problem that you're looking for, you know what I mean? Like, every data set already assumes that you're looking to find the answer, and you kind of already assume what the answer is. Mm-hmm. So I almost want to say that in the end there needs to be like a fuller representation within the scientific community that could represent everyone's interests.
Okay. So a more democratic scientific process. Yeah. Any problems with that? That's called IPCC, right? Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. You know, 5 scientists from every country in the world. Who cares the quality of their science? Right? I mean, you know, I'm going to overstate the case a little bit here, right, just to make a point, but important issues, really important issues here, which is, why else might we care? I mean, I think Miranda's raising a really interesting point, which is, if values are embedded in science, not only in the scientific process, which excludes certain kinds of experience from its data sets, but also embedded in the people who do science, right? That is, that what you look at, how you look at it, all that stuff is fully infused with values. Then an important part of changing that is going to involve some process of getting the right, that is a representative, whatever the hell we mean by that, but a representative group of people doing science, right? So that's an important part. There's going to be some trade-offs. I want to talk about some of them in a second, but Eli, on this?
Yeah, it's well similar, just sort of a wrapping up point. I don't know if you wanted to finish.
No, go.
I guess one question I had is, talking about the breast implants case, it seems like it's very easy to have sort of like identity politics there, because it's more on like a lower level. When you look at sort of a national level, say if you had all the jurors, like, they were going to have to pay out of their pockets for whatever they awarded the plaintiff or whatever. I feel like they would be a lot more interested in the science of it than in her story. I feel like that's what you get on a lot more of like the national, the treaty levels. Okay. You know, because it's a lot easier for them to be like, oh yeah, Dow Chemical's bad, you should pay her. Mm-hmm. You know, and it's a lot tougher to be like, oh, that's bad that happened to her, and here's, you know, $100,000 out of my pocket. Right.
The easiest example is PG&E right now, right? I mean, to say, yeah, everybody wants PG&E not to go under, and nobody wants to increase their energy bills, right? I mean, wait a minute, hello, these two things are connected, right? That's actually how PG&E makes its money, is when you pay your bill, and if they don't get paid, they don't make money. You know, and trying to make those linkages between, you know, it's much easier to say it's them, right? And I mean, this is the pogo version of environmentalism, right? That we found the enemy and they are us, right? That we are the problem, right? And it's so. But I think yes, those are important ways that they two interact. That there's.
And I think that's what you really need to start incorporating, or is like looking at, I guess the national problems more at like the breast implant level, you know, and not like the bad corporation should pay, but like, you know, we should start being like, oh, I feel that, you know, we're all responsible for this girl's implants or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I think, you know, everyone in like all the heads of different states don't really have that interpretation of like the world, and so I think that's where a lot of the problems are coming from. I think, you know, with the whole global climate change, you know, no one really wants to to cut down their, and pay to cut down their CO2 in the atmosphere.
Right. So these are important kind of components of it. And I think going back to this issue about how we want to worry about, let's say, kind of how do identity politics get things on the agenda, how do disinterested politics get things on the agenda. But the other thing is once you get it on the agenda, how many people swallow it? Right? And an important part of like participation in the IPCC is not so much about the content of the report. It's not worrying about it's in a sense not getting Miranda's part of the question right. That is, we bring in people from developing countries, etc., not because we want to make sure we're understanding the climate change problem in its holistic sense, but rather to build legitimacy, credibility with the audience, right? With the consumers of the product that you produce, right? So if I have a Native American on my water quality study, you know, again, at least in the IPCC case, in a lot of these big international sort of scientific studies, it's not so much that you believe, unfortunately, it's not so much that you believe that that Native American is going to bring a different perspective to what water quality means. You're certainly not bringing them in because of their experiential knowledge, because you're bringing them in because they went to Harvard and they got a nice PhD from there. So they fit your view of what a good scientific credential is. But you're bringing in because you can sell it to tribes in America as valid science, right? You're doing it as a packaging tool. Which isn't, but that's not to discount it fully, right? But to say that's important too, that if it's true, right? If it is true, whatever the hell that means, right? I mean, if it's valid, if it's good knowledge, you'd hate to have good knowledge thrown out because it's from the wrong right? From the wrong people, right? I mean, every once in a while, you know, white upper middle class Americans may have good knowledge that actually is good for African Americans and Native Americans and other poor people to know, right? You know, and if they don't listen for good reasons, because traditionally those groups have not provided valid knowledge that was relevant to the experiences of those people, how do you get that to happen too? So you want to worry about not only how do issues get on the agenda, but how do they get implemented? What's the downstream effects of how you do science, how you do knowledge? Where does experiential knowledge fit into that? I think those are really important issues. I mean, right now that's the big project I'm working on is this project about looking at how do you design a global environmental assessment, an assessment of climate change, of ozone, of water quality, of any of these things, in such a way, not merely that you get the science right, but that people listen to it, that it has some influence on policy out there in the world. And you can get the science as right as you want, and if people aren't listening and doing what they need to do, right, we better get climate science right enough that people all over the world start taking it seriously. And if all of the developing world doesn't take it seriously, not because the science isn't right, but because they weren't involved in the process of understanding that science, then you got a big problem, right? Because the solution requires that everybody pull together. Okay, so you want to be thinking about these kind of this interaction between disinterested politics, identity politics, and how those work together. And I don't dichotomize them as much as occurs in this article, but rather to see how do they fit together. You know, again, I think a lot of identity politics often is the first thing to get it on the agenda. There's not enough data points to do disinterested politics. You got 3 cases, you know. But, you know, the people in Love Canal did identity politics. That was identity politics. They said, we're getting screwed here. You know, or the people in Civil Action, right? The community in Massachusetts, right? That were downstream from a plant, right? That was identity politics, but they were right. And it just took a while for the science to catch up with the identity politics that was saying, hey, yes, these people are getting screwed, right? So the same thing with this zip code study, right? It's sort of saying these people knew it, and it was, you know, and the scientists were slow enough to finally get it right. This is a lot of this stuff in the lecture notes, because I want to switch over to this. I want to kind of go through just as an example Peter Haas's argument for a second. But when do states take action on a problem? Okay, for a lot is scientific knowledge. For better or worse, disinterested politics are the coin of the realm, right? They are what captures people's attention. The disinterested politics are what people in positions of power listen to, and that's, you know, Haas's argument is all about that, right? Is about under conditions of uncertainty, what do policymakers do? They turn to the scientists who give them a nice disinterested view of politics. You sort of, it's what you see is this sense of, you see problems. I mean, a lot of times what you see you see a dependent variable. You see a dependent variable with a bad value. The death of the Mediterranean, right? The ozone hole opening up. Then you look for a cause, and then you look for where's the policy lever you can manipulate to influence that cause, right? So once you see the ozone hole open up, you need to figure out what is it that's causing it. Luckily, there was theory existing before that said CFC should cause an ozone hole to open up, right? That 20 years earlier had come out, 15 years earlier had come out. So you're looking for that cause-effect relationship and then saying, let's influence the cause with policy, okay? So that's one thing that puts things on the agenda. The other is public saliency, okay, of a problem. How big, visible, how transparent, how much do we know about the problem? And I think an important thing about this is to think, this is where the importance of this comes out in doing comparison. This is why I like comparative case studies. Because the case I've been talking about, oil pollution. How do we know that oil pollution, or what do we think, how do we know that it's the transparency of oil pollution? In what way is oil pollution transparent? Eli?
When you see the tar balls on the beach.
You got it. Yeah, it's very transparent. It's when you have to take out the gasoline that had come over in the tanker, right? The refined gasoline that had come over in the tanker out of your garage to wash off the tar, which had come out the other part of the tanker, off your feet when you've been walking on the beach, right? I mean, it's that linkage between those two that we don't make, right? But yeah, so that it's visible in that way. So if we wanted to say that transparency, so here's a way to say, we have a theory. Okay, I have a theory that says, hey, transparency matters in terms of when issues get on the agenda. So what should we look at? What would be a good set of cases to select to test that theory? So now I've got a theory, that in the transparency, the visibility of a problem gets it on the agenda faster than others. So we want to pick another case that's similar in a lot of respects.
Smog in
Okay, smog in LA. Why? That's pretty visible. You choke on it, kind of, right?
Well, it's a visible problem, and people were obviously being affected by it, so then they tried to find how to solve the problem.
Great.
Versus
Good.
like,
Now, hold on a second, Ashley. How many think, just don't think too hard. How many think, yeah, right, smog in LA, visible problem. Good case. Okay, good. Hold that. Now, Ashley.
Well, I'm just saying, like, something else in the air that you couldn't see that's just as harmful.
Yes. Go back to the earlier discussion. We've got to have variation. We can't have the same value, okay? And yes, I want to get you to raise your hands because a lot of you were thinking the same thing. So I'm not going to just pick on Kari. I want all of you to recognize, yeah, okay, pick another visible problem. Wait. You could study the two visible problems from now till the cows come home, and it won't tell you jack about how visibility matters. Can't do it. Just can't do it. And yet we are all tempted to do that at first. Okay? So Ashley has the right category for what that second case has to be. One in which that it's not visible. What else has to be on that category list of looking for another case? Because it's an important part. So the first part is better vary on the independent variable, visibility, that we care about. So we better say the first characteristic of this other case, we have a case. The first characteristic of that other case has to be not visible. What's the other generic characteristic of this other case? And it's a big generic characteristic. That it's what? Relative to the oil pollution case, she said, we got to do the oil pollution case, but not visible. What else has to be true?
Has to be a big problem.
Has to be a big problem. Pollution. What else? What's the general category for where these guys are going? Has to look like the oil pollution case in every other regard. And only vary in the visibility, right? So now we have that category. Did people see why do I want everything else the same? Because I want to exclude them as potential causes of the variation in my dependent variable, which is how soon it got on the public agenda, right? I want to say, that can't explain why this one got on and this one didn't, because they were the same for those two, right? So you're using this combination of where things are the same, great, because we can exclude them as potential causes of variation in the dependent variable. Where independent variables are the same, that's great because we exclude them as causes of variation in the dependent variable. Where causes are different, the only in the causes that are different can they even possibly in the list of things of potential causes. Then we have to evaluate that. So, okay, so now, and this is really important in this process, to think through how do you pick cases. So now we know two things about our case. We want to look for a case that looks like oil pollution in all regards, oil pollution from ships in all regards, except non-visible pollutant. Eli told us what the operational version of pollutant is, floats and ends up on the beach. Therefore, so now, can that help us identify a case? Hanky?
Oh, no.
Just yawning?
Yeah.
Damn. Okay. What's the case? What's the case look like?
Maybe like mercury pollution or toxic.
Okay, keep going. Mercury?
Well, something like that where it's obviously not visible. It's in sediments, it's in fish, and people don't see it, but it can cause mercury.
And hopefully carried by ships and big tankers, right? I mean, what we would love is the other chemical that they take on the way back, right? That's what we'd like, is the thing that looks like it in all respects except, right? What we would love is oil, two kinds of oil, one of which doesn't float on water, right? And one of which does, right? That's what we'd like. And see which one got addressed earlier. And it turns out that all the chemicals were not addressed back in the 1950s when oil pollution was addressed. And then all of a sudden in the 1970s, the chemicals come on board. So, as a first approximation, we say, interesting, okay? Well, I mean, the other thing we'd have to deal with is, were they not shipping chemicals back in the 50s and they only started shipping them in the 70s, right? So we'd want to know a little bit about that. Actually, interesting, on the science stuff, they're interesting, fun little article in the New York Times today about, in the Science Times about, there's a charm school at MIT because these MIT people are so lacking in charm that they have to go to charm school, right? The old joke about MIT is that, why at MIT all the buildings are numbered, like E1-143? Why? They're all named after alumni. But in the charm school article, they talk about, well, look, it seems the dean who started it says, look, the charm school's made a difference. But then he says, he does a nice rival hypothesis. He says, so over the last 10 years, there seems to be more charm, more social grace at MIT. And he says, yeah, but what's the rival hypothesis? Well, 10 years ago, only 15% of the people at MIT were women. And now 45% are. And that tends to increase the charm, the need for kind of social grace between the genders, right, between the sexes, right? But at least a careful saying, hey, I can't take credit for all this charm around MIT because there's another cause that I didn't have that isn't the charm school, and that we would have an increase in charm anyway just by bringing a more balanced and diverse, sexually diverse community. Right? So I think that's just a nice case of this kind of being careful about how you make causal claims, right? Rather than getting more funding, if they're worried about charm at MIT, rather than spend more money on charm school, spend more money on getting women on campus, right? Which would have a lot of other benefits too. Okay, so this sort of, a second thing is the salience of the problem. Another thing, and I think this is an important thing in terms of whether something gets on the public agenda, is cost and benefits. In Latin, qui bono, right? Who wins, who gets screwed? Guess which kinds of problems get on the agenda? The ones when powerful actors get screwed, right? And I mean, this is what identity politics is all about, is saying that the ones that don't get on the agenda are the ones where disenfranchised people get screwed. Those cases just don't get on the agenda. The other is, so that's the sort of incidence of cost and benefits, just the size of cost and benefits. Large and costly ones get more attention than smaller ones, right? Spatial and temporal span is an important part of international stuff, okay? How many countries are affected, over what period of time. The longer the period of time, the less likely you may be to deal with it, or the more likely, you'd have to think about what's the theory there. And then lastly, a sort of political and institutional context. to think about, if you got an institution that can address a problem, guess what? It tends to go look for problems. Once you had the 1954 oil pollution treaty, guess what it tended to do? It tended to look for turf to claim, and it started regulating. Just for the, I mean, you get a bunch of lawyers together, what do? They got nothing better to do than regulate. So they go out and find new chemicals to regulate. Luckily, we were doing enough pollution that there was plenty to regulate. And so now they've regulated everything. They're worried about just from ships the CFCs and CO2 and all the climate change stuff coming just from ships, which are obviously a very small fraction of the total world problem. But they're regulating. They don't know what else to do. They've regulated everything else. Why not start regulating this? Right? So you need to you need to think that that's good. In other words, if you think that these things should be regulated, then having an institution that can regulate them is a good thing. So the acid rain group in Europe, the Convention on Long-Range Transboundary Air Pollution, has 8 protocols now. And they're looking for more. Looking for more things to regulate. That's if you think there's a lot of problems that are still unregulated, that's a good thing, right? To have an institutional context that facilitates the floating up of these issues and their regulation. Those should give you some pause to think about when should we regulate things. I want to just walk through. You've all read the article by Peter Haas, and I want to take a moment then to kind of just get you thinking. Go back to the question I raised. And I'm gonna pick Peter apart a little bit just for fun. He's a friend. He can take it. Can people kind of read that? But what I want to do is, this is a sort of urging you to bring both to your own to your own work and that of those you read. Do it of those you read for starters, and then start doing it of your own. Is to just say, okay, I'm going to look at this person's claim, and just see if it passes the laugh test. Okay. So Peter Haas makes a claim that the Med Plan caused, that kind of evidence of the Med Plan's influence is the fact that the Med Plan, signed in 1976, caused the creation of a bunch of environmental protection agencies. Okay? So, and those of you who I've walked through this in office hours can't pipe up, okay? So just looking at this, can all of you even read it? Can any of you read it? Okay, I'll walk through it. Med Plan in 1976. So now let's make a claim or make a prediction about what should we expect to see. And then this is where you want to have a dependent variable out there that you predict from your theory, right? And then the observed. You want to have all your independent variables, and you make a prediction about what the dependent variable should be, right? Pre-treaty, no behavior change, post-treaty, big behavior change, right? And then we want to see what kind of behavior change did we see before and after, okay? So what's our prediction? We better make a prediction first. It's in some senses a post-diction, right? It's already happened 25 years ago, but we're still kind of predicting it in the absence of knowing, right? Or in the presence of knowing, but forgetting it temporarily. So what's the prediction here? That we should see EPAs, what should happen? The number of EPAs created should what?
Increase.
Emily.
Increase after the signing of the Med Plan.
Okay, how soon after? Right away?
Yeah.
Day after? Everybody goes out and creates EPAs?
I'm not sure.
Okay, well, anybody do better than Emily? Emily's not sure, so help her out here.
2 years.
2 years, why 2 years? Alex?
Political associations.
The wheels of bureaucracies grind slowly, right?
Very slowly.
Now we have social processes in which you'd want to go out and actually, if you were going to do this well, go out and say, how long does it take to create an agency in most countries, or a ministry, right? What's kind of the average length of time? And say, from 1976 till, is that the right thing, from the day it was signed? That's the date we should use for the start of it? So we find out it takes 27.32 months on average for an agency to be set up by any government in the world, right? In fact, if we want to do it really well, we'd figure it out what's the different rates for each country, right, and make predictions about how soon they would do it, right? We'd want to know Italy, it takes 532 months, right? In Germany, it takes 1.7 months. We'll make all our little assumptions. But so now we've got predictions for each country. When do we start the clock? The day of the treaty signed? When?
Before.
Why?
People know it's coming. They know the negotiations are.
So we have some process in which the negotiations themselves is not the treaty signing, it's the treaty negotiation process that kicks this in. So we have to figure out how many months before, and we'd read the literature, the negotiation history to figure out kind of when do we expect it to kick in. And then we could have a little, just like most scientists do, like a band, right? Of saying if it's within anywhere from 24 to 28 months, we call it as an impact, right? If it's before 24 months, it had to be something else. If it's after 28 months, it had to be something else as well, right? Okay, so what do you want to, just as a first part to do the laugh test, what things can we exclude? Let's make the band really far for starters. So it's a 1976 treaty. Which environmental protections agencies could we exclude as not having been created by the Met Plan? Before what? Before 76? Maybe to use molecules before 75, right? We're saying it starts in 70, let's say 5. What shall we use as sort of our baseline length of time? 2 years? Seem reasonable? Say you could probably create an agency in 2 years? So before 77 doesn't work, right? 77 or before doesn't work and everything. And then what's the outside where we say, no, that's so late that it couldn't have been caused by this, it had to be something else? What should we say? 82? Okay, so between 77 and 82. And, Megan's laughing, but okay, fair enough. Make a guess and say, okay, we'll start with that. So then we have this long string. How many of these count? Okay, well, 1974, boom, not in, right? Okay, so no. 79, yes. 83, no. So there's one, I'll keep on this hand how many count as evidence that it might have been created by Met Plan. 79 is 1, 80 is 2, 82 is 3, 70 no, 74 no, 76 no, 80 is 4, 73 no, 76 no, 73, 83, 86 no. Between 73 and 83, that data is too vague to be even useful. 81, yes, no, no, no. This is 71, no. These three don't have them anyway. 74, no, no. 72, no. 78, no. So that's 6. 78, yes. Sorry, I did add. I said no, but I added it. No. Okay. So that's 6. 71, no, no. 75, no. 79, yes. 74, no, and 82. So that's 8 out of, I don't know, you did the math, right? About 20. Effect? And those are the only 8 potential cases. Out of those, we've got to look for rival hypotheses that there were processes already in line. The Green Party got elected. It would have happened regardless of the treaty. 100 other things, right? But those are the best case, 8. So this is just sort of saying, wait, you should be able to take a chart like this and pull it apart a little bit, okay? And you should be able to do it for yourself. Do you pass the laugh test, right? If, this is the same thing as saying, so Jennifer is the only person who's done it yet. But so here's a question. She says, adoption of the OECD measures on mercury production, did they decrease the amount of mercury produced worldwide? It at least passes the laugh test, right? On average, it's starting to come down. It's only 5 years. It'd be nice to have a longer string of data to check that and see if this was just a crater in the mercury market or whatever, right? And you'd want to have other explanations. But it passes the laugh test. That's good. She's at least not trying to explain. One of the things you come across sometimes is somebody who's trying to explain the decrease in mercury when in fact there was an increase in it, right? That's troubling, But this is, passes the laugh test. That's good. Okay, that's a place to start. So I think you want to bring that kind of critical analytic sense to even the stuff you read in these wonderful articles that actually, are disinterested politics or what pass for it in political science.